Well, good morning, church.
Good morning.
Are you enjoying this warmer weather, or are you looking forward to when it's going to get cooler again?
Cooler.
What is this? This back row, 2 rows, you just got, and then this big gap, All right, whatever. Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for your love and for your guidance. Thank you so much for a body of believers, a group of people that we can talk with and fellowship with and share life with. Father, thank you for your word that you use to instruct us and teach us in this life. So Lord, as we come before you today, and as we open your word, I just ask that you teach us, that we learn from you, that you'll be the one speaking through me, and it won't be my words, it'll be yours. That your Holy Spirit, Lord, will be the one heard. We pray, Lord, for your anointing on this group of people. In Christ's name. Amen. I was reading a story about a supply preacher. If you don't know what that is, a lot of churches are between pastors for one reason or another, and so they have to get somebody to fill in. And so this church had gone through a network or whatever, a supply preacher in a small Texas town. So this guy, what he would do is he would drive in every Sunday to church, he'd preach, have lunch, go back home, wherever that happened to be. Well, anyway, one Sunday morning, he drove in, and as his custom was, he stopped at the donut shop. He pulled out his sermon and grabbed his donut and his coffee, and he started going over his notes to get prepared for the day. And there was a guy in the donut shop looked over at him, and he said, "You preacher or something?" The guy says, "Well, yes, actually. I've been preaching at the Christian church here in town." The guy's face lit up. He says, "What?" He says, "I'm a member of that church." And this confused the supply pastor because he had been there for a while, and it was a small church, and he'd never seen this guy before. So he said, "Well, that's funny." He says, I've been preaching there for 3 months, and I've never met you." The guy's face changed a little bit. He says, "Well, I said I was a member of the church. I didn't say I was fanatical about it." Sometimes our attitude towards church is not what it should be, right? I don't mean you have to be here every single time that door opens, because it's open quite a lot. But what is your attitude toward church? What is your attitude toward coming together as a body of believers? What's it all about for you? What is your attitude toward the Christian life? Is it just something you do? Or is it who you are? Our memory verse, Acts 2:47, says this. It's talking about the early believers, and it catches you in mid-sentence. But it says, "Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved." Think about that last statement there. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Can you imagine that? Let's say it was just one being added a day. How many? What's the date today? Everybody has to look at their phones or something like that, right? June 11th. Okay, June has 30 days. So, math whiz is here. How many more days in this month? 29? Okay, maybe I use math whiz a little bit loosely here. How many more days are left? If you have 11 from 30, how many? 19, okay. Whew. All right, 19 days left. Let's say that we add a member to this church every day of this month. That's 19 more people in here. But wait a minute, let's say that we expand for the rest of the year, 6 months. Now, 30 days has September, April, June, and November. Basically means for the next 6 months we have 4 of those months have 31 days, and 2 of those months have 30 days. So, do the math. How many more if we added one every day? Now I can see a calculator back there. People trying to figure this out. I'll help you out. It's 184. Okay? So if you add 184 to 19, what do you get? Huh? 203. Imagine in this room, by the end of the year, 203 more people. Scott, we need a new building. Get busy again, man.
You got one.
Can you imagine a person a day, and it doesn't say just one, who knows how many, daily being added to the congregation? This is explosion. This is an explosion of a movement, explosion of a church happening. No question about it, the church's early success was amazing. Last week we had a Pentecost celebration. We talked about all that went on. At the end of that day, at the end of Pentecost, it said there were how many were added to the church?
3,000.
3,000 people. One day, 3,000 people were added to the church. Scott, I don't think we're going to fit 3,000 over there. There's no way. What kind of building did they have? I mean, they must have had a great building, right? No, they didn't have a building. They had a lot of members. They didn't have a building. God was doing something amazing. So what was their secret? What was the big deal? What was their secret? How did this all happen? Was it, I don't know, were the apostles just like a cult of the celebrity? Were the apostles just really good-looking guys? You know? Maybe Peter was up there, you know, he was a really good-looking guy. He had the most fashionable robe on. Yeah, you know? The sandals, you know, were by, I don't know. Who's a big sandal person, you know, that makes shoemaker? Maybe something like that, you know. Abraham of Jerusalem or something like that, you know. I mean, did he have a great head of hair or something like that, you know? Is that what you need to be a great celebrity? Now, I don't think it was that. Well, maybe it was their building. Maybe the church had already built something really big, right? They had this great worship center. And they had this big choir, right, with nice robes, and maybe they had an orchestra pit, and they had all this, and programs for the kids. And no, nothing like that existed. It wasn't a secret. The secret was God. God was the one bringing the increase. Yes, God gives the increase. But you and I have a part. You and I have a part in this kingdom building process. You and I have to take a stand. We can't just have the general attitude, yeah, well, I said I was a member, but I'm not a fanatic about it. We have to have the attitude that this is important. We have to have the attitude that we need to be part of what God is doing. Why do we study history? Somebody is saying, man, I'm in my history classes in school. I don't know. Why do you study history? The answer that you usually hear is we study history to not repeat the mistakes of the past, but there's another reason. We study history to learn the lessons of the successes from the past so that we can apply those also to our lives. And so when we study church history, when we look back at this early church, we see a lot of great things happening. Mistakes too, but a lot of great things that we can learn from. and hopefully we can apply to our own church, our own lives today. We're starting a series called Tales of the Early Church. I think it kind of moves really nice segue from Pentecost. Tales of the Early Church. We're going to look at things they did right and things they did wrong. The first tale we hear comes right after Pentecost. This first tale is a tale about common life. A common life. Now, when I use the term a common life, what do you think of? Well, my life's so common. No, that's not what I mean. A common life. Jan Karon, in her Mitford series of books, one of her novels, it's like number 6 or 7 in the series, is called A Common Life. And basically, the theme of this is the marriage between two of the big characters in the book that you know has been building toward. They have established a common life. And oftentimes we use that for marriage. Two people coming together, very symbolic of actually Christ and the church, right? Building that common bond, that common life together. But we can also apply it, not necessarily just with Christ and the church or the marriage between a man and a woman. We can apply that to what a church should be, what a church can be. We should have a common life together. We should be able to live together in a way that resembles in many ways a family. Look at our focal passage today, Acts 2, 42 through 47. It says, they devoted themselves, it's the early church, the early believers, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved, which is our memory verse. But there's a lot of things in here. There's a lot of things about the early church that we can look at. Basically, we have to ask this question. This is a really beautiful picture of a church. But is that church a shiny new building? No. Is it something that they did once a week, maybe 3 or 4 hours at a time, gathered together? No. This was community. This was a family. In the very truest sense. This was we used to have what we call communes, and there's still some. And communes, whether they happen to be a convent or a monastery or a regular commune with a bunch of families together, etc., they have good and bad problems. But the sense there is that we're all coming together and we're all sharing. We're all part of a bigger unit than ourselves. And that's what a church should be. We're all coming together, not as individuals. Not, you sit here, you sit here, you sit. Why are we divided? We have everybody over here, just a few over here. We not like these people or something? I mean, we have one sister here, one sister there. Uh-oh, family split. No. That shouldn't be, and I know it's not in this case. But sometimes it feels like that, doesn't it? Sometimes in church it feels like you're here as an individual. You're not part of the whole. That is definitely not what the church that Christ died for is supposed to be like. It's supposed to be a family. It's supposed to be a community of believers getting together and sharing like the picture that we see in the New Testament church. Well, what made it this way? What made them act this way? Obviously it was God's Spirit. But there are some lessons. There are some lessons still that we can learn, honest growth for us today. And the first one that we can learn here is that this church grew spiritually. The church grew spiritually. Now, all of us grow, right? From the time of conception on, we grow. Some of us grow up. My youngest son, Nicky, is now taller than me. That's sad, actually. He's growing up, I'm growing out. You know, I'm not sure what's wrong with this picture, but yeah, we all grow. We get bigger. We must grow. What happens if you don't grow? You rot. You ever see a garden with, let's say, watermelons growing in it? You see these watermelons, and if you're watching them, they're growing bigger and bigger and bigger, right? But sometimes something happens, a watermelon falls wrong, or somebody has walked through the garden or whatever and damaged it, and one of the vine comes separated from one of those growing watermelons. What happens? All the other watermelons, man, they're connected to the vine, they're getting the nutrients, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're going to be nice and juicy. But that one watermelon that got separated from the vine just sits there, right? And eventually it begins to collapse and rot. The flies come. Nasty. It's exactly what happens when we as a church somehow get disconnected from the Spirit. When we're not growing spiritually, we rot. When we are not connected to the vine, we rot. A church dies because there's no life in it when the Spirit's not there. Because the Spirit is the lifeblood of the church. In this case, though, we see the church growing. Why? Because there's life in there. And I'm not just talking numerically, because there are churches that can grow numerically because they're just a popular place to be. There's no life there. They're just growing. But this church is growing not only numerically, this church is growing spiritually. It is getting deeper. It is getting its nutrients from God. How are some of the ways we see it growing? One of the ways that we see it is they were devoted. Now, what does devoted mean? If you're devoted to something, what does that mean? It means that whatever that object is or whatever that activity is, you spend a lot of time focusing on it. You're really concentrating on it. It's something that is important to you, that you're willing to sacrifice other things in your life for. We see that these people are devoted, first of all, the Bible says, to the apostles' teaching. They're devoted to the apostles' teaching. Now you think, well, why is that such an important thing? Remember, this is pre-New Testament. The New Testament has not been written yet. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all those wonderful gospel stories about Jesus, not been written down. All those Pauline letters that we read in the New Testament, guess what? Paul at this time, he's not even a Christian. So it doesn't exist. So how are these people going to grow? How are they going to learn the Word of God? They learn it from the apostles because the apostles had walked with Christ. The apostles had been with Jesus, and they are sharing Jesus' life. They're sharing what they experienced firsthand with these new believers. I mean, talk about coming from the source. And so they're devoted to the apostles' teaching because they are saying, hey, when we were with Jesus, this is what happened. When we were with Jesus, this is what he taught. This is what he did. When we were with Jesus, this is what we saw. So they're devoted to that. They're learning. They're soaking it up. They're growing in spirituality from what they're hearing, what they're learning. The second thing that we see they're devoted to is they're devoted to fellowship. Now you think to yourselves, well, fellowship is nice, right? But how important is it? I mean, does it strike you as odd that they're devoted to teaching? We get that, but they're also devoted to fellowship. Question, why are you here? Some of you, maybe you came for the music. Music was really good today, wasn't it? Maybe that's why you came. Maybe you came for the teaching. I hear that Pastor John, he is so good. Oh my, you know. And he looks good too. Maybe you're here for the fellowship. The connect groups, right? Time to spend together. Maybe you're here for the refreshments. I don't know.
Donuts.
We're having donuts today. Yeah. I picked them up. We had donuts today. Now everybody's excited. But for people like me who tend to be more, I don't know, scholarly, get over into my corner someplace and read a book, that kind of thing, fellowship is not as a big a deal necessarily to me. But I recognize its importance. I recognize how valuable fellowship is. And so did the early church. They were growing not only in the apostles' teaching, they're growing in fellowship. They're learning to spend time together. Iron sharpening iron. Practicing a common life. It says they're also, along with this, they were devoted to breaking of bread. Now, what's the importance of sharing a meal together? Is it important? A lot of families practice where you can do lots of things. You can have your sports activities, you can do whatever, but you have to be home for the dinner table. We tried that. It didn't work in my family. We were never able to do it. But every other week we have love feast here. Why is that important? Why is it important to spend time with each other over a table, breaking bread? The thing is that studies show it's very healthy for us too. For one thing that sharing meal does is it breaks down a lot of the barriers. It allows you to get with other people and release a lot of the stress in your lives. Because you can, hopefully in the right kind of breaking bread, you feel accepted. You feel that you're there as a part of something. As you're part of a group of people. It's a time where you can share. Maybe stories, maybe ideas, ask questions. It's a time where you can maybe strengthen your friendship bonds. They even say that social interaction that happens there, for people who are aging, it actually helps them focus, and there's thinking that social interactions, the more social interactions that people have when they're older, may help reduce dementia and Alzheimer's. Because they're sharing with each other. They're spending time with each other. It's a time of affirmation. It's a time of reducing isolation. It's a time of promoting and caring and accepting of a person and ideas. It fosters unity. That's why it's so important. That's why cultures throughout the ages, they've done archaeological digs, and they found ancient bread that was baked, thousands of years ago. And they could see the scoring marks where they had put to divide it among the people. Breaking the bread together. It's an important part of bringing together unity. And so you see in a very spiritual sense that these people at the early church, they're not only devoted to the teaching and to the fellowship, they're devoted to that breaking bread together, creating that body life, learning to appreciate and affirm each other, growing with each other in this way. And the fourth thing it says they were devoted to was prayer together. How many of you enjoy praying with each other? Oh, good, a few. How many of you have come to the Wednesday night prayer meeting? A few. Not quite as many hands. Not quite as many hands. The thing is that sometimes we feel uncomfortable. We feel uncomfortable coming to a prayer meeting thinking, oh man, all these people know more about it. They're better at praying. I'll be foolish. I'll look foolish when I pray. But you know what? That shouldn't stop anyone. Because praying together is a vital thing. it does promote unity as well. Praying together teaches, it unifies, it brings us together under common concerns. It's a vital thing. And the early believers had it down. Another thing you see in their growing spiritually, it says they were in awe at wonders and signs performed by the apostles. The thing is, the apostles could only do this if they had the Spirit working through them, right? There's a big connection between faith and miracles. Obviously, then, we're seeing a lot of faith on the part of the people because a lot of miracles are going on. Christ even says, you know, if you have this much faith, you can move mountains. He talks a lot about faith. There's even a passage there where it says that there's one area that he didn't do very many miracles. Why? Because the faith wasn't there. Faith and miracles. And so we see these people, they're at awe at the wonders and signs performed by the apostles, but because it's happening, we know there has to be faith. There has to be growth. There has to be a spiritual sense of this church that is on the move here spiritually. It's growing. Second way that we see them growing, though, beyond spiritually, is we see that the church grew in ministry. I talk a lot here, you say, you do talk a lot, Pastor John. But I talk a lot about how we were never meant to sit and soak. We were never meant to sit and soak. My experience with plants has really brought this home recently. One of the things about plants that I discovered is that you can water them and water them and water them and water them and water them. But if there's no way for that water to move out, then all you're going to do is kill the plant. Because plants cannot just sit and soak. You destroy them that way. You and I, if we just sit and soak in church, you just sit there and you soak in the teaching and you never apply it, you never move beyond that, you'll be destroyed. You'll rot. Your leaves will wither. You will not be productive. You'll definitely not produce fruit. Because that's not the purpose. The purpose of church is to get together, to fellowship, to come together as a body of believers and then move out. That's all what we're about. The early church understood this. They understood the need, the absolute mandate to apply the teaching. They understood that this was not all about them and coming together to feel good. It was about ministry. They knew the fact that ministry is as much a blessing to us as it is to others. Through service, we learn what's really important. You say, well, where do we see the ministry? Well, look. For example, in this passage, we learn that they held on loosely to things. It says they had all of everything in common. What's that mean? To have everything in common basically means this. It's not, well, okay, we're going to have a get-together. Now, this is mine, and this is yours. No. This is ours. We have everything in common. Hey, I've got my robe here, you know. Oh, you need to borrow my robe to go someplace? Okay, fine. You need to borrow my nice little Abraham of Jerusalem sandals. Okay, fine. You know, you can take it away. I brought some oil here. You know, I bought it with my own money, but hey, you need part of it to break some bread? No problem. Go ahead. You need it all? No problem. We have it all in common. It's all being shared. When I need something, I feel comfortable being able to get it to. Another thing we see in ministry of this going on, it says they sold property and possessions to give to those in need. Now we are taught, I mean, I remember as a little child, save money, right? You take a little bit of percentage of what you get in your allowance and you save it, right? And it grows, hopefully, right? And a lot of people in this church A lot of people have been saving money for a long time and investing money, and there are people with rental properties and businesses and all these different kinds of things. And that's great stuff. But we learned here that in this early church, they sold property and possessions to give to those in need. Does that mean you should never have any property? Never have any possessions? No, we need to be good stewards. Some of that property actually earns us money, right? But what do we do with the proceeds? What do we do with the profits? Is it all about us? All about us getting the nicest car and the new house and the best clothes and all of this, and having a whole closet full of Abraham of Jerusalem sandals? No, that's not it at all. We should hold on loosely to our property and possessions as well. We should realize that they're a gift from God to us. And that if He wants us to sell them, to help somebody else, we should. Because, quite frankly, which is more important? People or possessions? When you die, what are you taking with you? You taking your stuff? No. But you are taking your good works. You are taking the things that you have done for God, the ways that you have helped people, those good works for Christ. Those are the ones that are in heaven that you've been building up, where moth and dust does not destroy, or rust. Not the stuff. So we need to hold on loosely, and they got this. They got the idea that they needed to help those in need. It doesn't say just in the church either. We're helping those in need. It says they met together publicly in the temple courts. He's thinking, well, how is this ministry? You know, meeting in public is not exactly easy sometimes. We had a Bible study until UCO changed its policies a bit. Our Bible study on Tuesdays met on the UCO campus right there in front of the Constitution Hall. Right out in the open. What did that do? Well, it was uncomfortable at times, and people gave us funny looks at times. But sometimes people would stop, ask what we were doing, and say, "Can I join you?" There's a guy here named Luke. Doesn't come to this congregation because he can't come on Sundays. But he's here every Friday night for the activities. And he's here for, unless he's out of the town or something, he's here on Tuesday nights for the Bible studies. But what's his story? What's his background? He came one day. He heard about the fact that we were meeting. He came one day to UCO. He doesn't go to UCO. He came and said, "Can I join you?" Disciples meeting together publicly in the temple courts. And people are seeing that. People are seeing these people and wondering what's going on. It's an outreach. It's a way of ministry. And they also carried out ministry in their own homes by breaking bread together. You know, when you bring somebody in your house, sometimes it's a little bit difficult. You're welcoming in, you're preparing the food oftentimes. You're allowing yourself to be vulnerable by having somebody in your home. All these things that we're seeing here are forms of ministry. They're not real showy. They're not requiring great tons of funds and things like that or programs. But they're real life ministry. Real life reaching out. The common thread in all these forms of ministry was sharing. They're sharing. They're sharing what they own. They're sharing their time. They're sharing their personal space. And in the process, they're also sharing their faith. You know, it's really easy for us to freeze up at the idea of sharing our faith. But the thing is, it's a natural outcome of when we share ourselves. If you and I share ourselves with other people, then eventually we're going to share our faith too, in a very natural way. True ministry is not programs. It's a lifestyle. And the last way that we see them growing beyond spiritually and beyond ministry is it says the church grew in favor. The church grew in favor. As the people ate together with sincere and glad hearts, they were praising God who provides all. That came naturally. These were happy. These were joy-filled people. Well, was life so wonderful for them that was what made them joyful? What, I mean, was everything just great? No. I mean, this is a time where the Romans are still oppressing the people. This is a time where there's a lot of distrust from the Jews and eventually persecution. They're poor people. I mean, you're not providing for the needy if there aren't needy, right? And yet, these people are marked by a difference. They're joy-filled. And it says they found favor with all people. How? Well, actually, the better question is, how could they not? How could they not find favor with doing the kinds of things they were doing, with being the kind of people they are? How could they not find favor with others around them? And as a result, as they grew in favor, you saw the daily growth of the church numerically as well. So we come to the question about us. Are we growing in our common life? Are you and I growing in our common life? God has given us a wonderful gift beyond our salvation. He's given us community. He's given us each other. But like the early church, we must be devoted to spiritual growth. We must also grow in ministry by sharing ourselves with others around us. If we do so successfully, we can expect growth in favor and in numbers. So, are you ready to grow? Are you ready to grow? You know, I want to try something. What we used to do in Africa, after the end of a sermon that I would preach, we did something a little bit different to help with the body life. I haven't done it here yet, but I want to try it because we have some time especially. What we would do at the end of the service is I would open it up for questions and comments. Now that's kind of vulnerable, right? Because that means you guys can ask me anything, and I'll try to answer it. Now, I don't pretend to be the world's best expert at everything. I mean, I've read the Bible. I've read it several times. I've studied it. I've sat through seminary classes. Doesn't mean I know every single thing. But the thing is that we together can learn. We together can explore it. Maybe something that was said today brought up a question in your mind. Maybe a totally unrelated question about the Bible. That's okay too. Or maybe a comment, maybe an experience where you saw something like this or you experienced something like that. So here's what I want to do. No silly questions. Yeah, there will be silly questions. But I mean, what I mean is that even simple questions oftentimes are good questions. So,
what are your views on mega churches and how should the church, I guess, from this church to those outside the church? Like, should we grow, like, if we grow some 500,000, do we stay within the mega church, or is it better for a church like separate out? You know?
That's an excellent question. He's asking about mega churches. What do I think? I think the biggest thing that you have to be sensitive to is what is the Lord telling you at the time about the mega church. Because a mega church, there are some people that really grow in that environment. They feel part of a much bigger picture. okay? And for them, it's like, oh, I'm connected not only with this congregation, but that congregation over there, and we see our pastor on video, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they feel that connection, okay? There are others that may not, and they feel to be able to grow, they really need to be in a congregation where they're more hands-on with things. I think, God didn't make us into cookie cutter Christians. Some people respond better to one style or one environment than another. So, short answer, I think it really depends on the individual. I don't think that you can say that mega churches are wrong. Okay? I think there's a place for the mega church, and there's definitely a place for the smaller congregation.
So what about like those? Because like I feel like in mega churches, it kind of if you want to serve in a mega church, the depth and the amount of service is kind of less because
That can definitely be a problem in some mega churches. How they get around that in some mega churches is that each building, each congregation, because the mega church is usually made up of many congregations, they have their own worship team. Oftentimes they have their own set of pastors that minister to people. They have their own nursery workers. They have their own different people involved in different forms of outreach within that congregation. So they're connected to a larger group, but they still have a smaller church feel. Yeah. Depends if they do it well. Yeah. Other questions? That was a great question. About something you heard today or a comment, anything? Don't ask what's for refreshments. We've already answered that. It's donuts. And this may seem a little strange format for you at the time, but if we do it more, you'll find that it does loosen you up a little bit. One of the things that it really did for our church in Africa is it really did help bring us together because we could share what was going on. So let me ask you the question. Have you ever experienced anything in your own lives what was similar to this, where you were part of a group of people, a group of Christians, that there was something different about them? They were really living body life. What was that like for you? Don't be shy. No one bites in here. Not unless they know you better.
I think for me it created a sense of accountability.
Okay.
So it made me want to grow as well and see other people growing.
Okay. Was this in Malaysia or where was it?
In Malaysia and also part at times over here.
Okay. Create that sense of accountability and make you want to grow. Good. Yeah.
So me and my friends, during my senior year, we would have like Bible study during lunch in front of everyone, like in our cafeteria. And that just allowed me to remember, like, the gospel isn't any internal thing where we just make our fellowship in our church extremely well and godly, but it's also something that we must also be, going out and sharing with the rest of the people. So by having like friends not just within the church, but also like, my brothers and sisters, my church, really devoted to God and outside, and that helped me focus on what my faith really stands for. So
That's excellent. And in many ways, it was a good thing for the early church that they didn't have a building. Because their tendency would have probably been, hey, let's just congregate together. But instead, they were doing exactly what you're doing. They're out in a very public place, the temple courts. They're out in a very public place and they're worshiping together, and people noticed. And I'm sure it had the same reaction for them. Because I don't think that all 3,000 were gathered together in the temple courts. People had to go home. Because a lot of these converts were from other cities, right? So you probably had different meetings, different groups of people getting together. Probably very much like what you're talking about, small groups getting together, praying, studying together, etc. And it did create, I'm sure, a sense of accountability, a sense of a greater purpose.
They had house churches.
They did.
And when I was involved in this type of reaction, I grew a lot by watching somebody else, how they were growing. And for their example, encouraged me
Mhm.
to grow and to also, so I can be an example of somebody else.
Very good. Was that my alarm to say to stop? Well, if there's no more questions, let's stop for the day. But I'd like to do this periodically with you, especially when we have some time, because it does tend to bring people together. Okay? All right. So, go ahead.
Okay, we'll go into the time of tithes and offerings.